Paul had always been drawn to the unknown. As a 32-year-old office worker with a passion for photography, his weekdays were consumed with paperwork, phone calls, and the mundane. But every weekend he transformed. With his camera in hand, Paul would venture far from the city to capture the beauty of the untouched wilderness. He hoped one day to make a living from his photography, but the dream had eluded him, until one weekend changed everything. It all started with a simple plan, a quiet photography trip to a remote forest he had never visited before. Little did he know, this adventure would lead him to a discovery that would alter his life forever. Paul woke up early that Saturday, excited for the new shots he might capture. The forest was over 130 miles away, untouched by human presence, perfect for wildlife photography. The drive was peaceful, with the morning sun casting a golden glow over the winding roads. As Paul arrived and parked at the edge of the forest, an eerie silence enveloped him. He set off on foot, his camera swinging gently by his side. The deeper he ventured, the more the forest seemed to swallow him. The path became overgrown, the trees denser, and the air heavy with the scent of moss and damp earth. Hours passed as Paul snapped photos of wildflowers, towering trees, and the occasional bird flitting between the branches. But something kept nagging at him, a strange sense that he wasn't alone. And then out of nowhere he saw it. An old rusted car lay hidden in a small clearing, partially covered in vines and foliage. The sight of it was jarring. What was a car doing this deep in the woods? It looked like it had been abandoned for years. Paul's curiosity got the best of him. He approached cautiously, the crunch of leaves under his boots echoing in the quiet forest. Peering inside the car, Paul noticed the interior was in shambles, seats torn, windows cracked. But it was the trunk that caught his attention. It was slightly open, as if beckoning him to look inside. With a deep breath, Paul slowly lifted the trunk lid. Inside he found a small wooden box, wrapped in a clear plastic bag. A faded shipping label was stuck to the front. The name Martha was barely legible, but the rest of the label had worn away, making it impossible to read the date. A sense of unease washed over Paul. What was this box doing in the middle of the forest? Should he open it? But no, something about it felt personal. Instead of peeking inside, Paul decided to do something he hadn't expected. He was going to find Martha. His phone still had signal, so he quickly searched the address on the label. Surprisingly, it was only a few hours away, in a small neighboring town. Paul carefully placed the box in his backpack and began the long trek back to his car, his mind racing with possibilities. Who was Martha? Why had the box been abandoned in the forest for so long? And most importantly, what was inside? The drive to the address was surreal. The small town was quiet, with narrow streets and old houses that looked frozen in time. Paul's heart pounded as he pulled up to the house listed on the label. It was an old, ivy-covered home, with weathered brick and a porch that creaked under the weight of years. Paul hesitated before knocking on the door. After a few moments, the door creaked open, and a young woman appeared. She couldn't have been much older than 25, with curious eyes that studied him carefully. "Hi, I'm Paul," he began nervously. "I found something in the woods that I think belongs to someone named Martha." The woman's face changed instantly. "Martha was my grandmother," she said softly. "She passed away a few years ago. What is this about?" Paul pulled the wooden box from his backpack and handed it to her. "I found this in the trunk of an old car deep in the forest. The address led me here." The woman, who introduced herself as Veronica, looked at the box with trembling hands. She carefully opened it, revealing climbing gear and other personal items. Her eyes filled with tears. "These belong to my grandfather," she whispered. "He went missing over 10 years ago during a mountain climbing expedition. We searched for him for years, but we never found him." My grandmother was devastated. Paul listened intently, feeling the weight of her words. "Do you think the car I found in the forest belonged to him?" he asked, his voice soft. Veronica shook her head. "No, my grandfather didn't own a car. But after he went missing, a man contacted my grandmother. He had found my grandfather's belongings at the base camp where he disappeared. He promised to bring them to her, but we never heard from him again. We assumed the box was lost forever." Paul couldn't believe what he was hearing. By pure chance, he had stumbled upon a piece of a long-lost mystery. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said. "I hope this brings your family some closure." Veronica smiled through her tears. "It does, more than you know. Thank you so much, Paul." As they spoke, Veronica asked Paul what he had been doing in the forest. When he explained his passion for photography, her eyes lit up. "My uncle Stuart runs a company that's always looking for creative photographers," she said. "I'd be happy to introduce you." Paul couldn't believe his luck. A few days later, he found himself in Stuart's office. His photography portfolio spread out before him. Stuart was impressed with Paul's work. and offered him a job on the spot. It was a dream come true. Not only had Paul helped reunite a family with a piece of their lost past, but his passion for photography had led him to the opportunity he had been waiting for. His life was about to change forever. As Paul drove home that evening, he thought about how strange life could be. What had started as a simple photography trip had become an adventure of fate, mystery, and unexpected connections. And it all began with an abandoned car in the forest. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to subscribe to Zap Tales for more incredible stories like this one. You never know what surprises life might have in store.